Welcome to the Supporters Fund Ask an Angel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Potvin, and let's welcome our guest today from Singapore, Tobias. Did I say that right? I was going to make sure I didn't want to mess that up, but Tobias.
100% right. You sound like a German.
Well, Tobias, pleasure having you, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely, Jeffrey. Thanks so much for having me in the first place, and excited about the questions you're gonna ask me.
Well, there's lots of good ones, I hope, but we're going to dive right into it so we can learn lots about you and what you guys are up to today. So Tobias, maybe I know you're in Singapore today, which is fantastic. Nice little country. I love it there. Let's dive into it. If you could give us a little bit more about your background, kind of where you've come from, where you're at today, where you're going, and then one thing about you that nobody would know.
Yeah, it's a good question. I like the second one. You started with a bit of a background, and then we dive into the secret question. So I'm originally not from Singapore. I'm from Germany, actually. It's a tiny place close to Munich. Actually, it's an hour drive in the south, close to Austria. It's called Oberammergau. It's quite a mouthful. So grew up there, obviously. Went to school in Germany. Did a law degree in Germany as well, and then kind of like went into the investment banking side of things across Europe. Was a little bit in consulting across Europe as well, but mostly in Austria and Germany. Basically in the recovery service where we brought businesses back to profitability. And then moved to Dubai. I was in the tech space, sort of an SME company. We work with Iran, Iraq, a bunch of emerging markets in the space, helped them with their mobile phone penetration, and gave people access to games, music, and all this kind of stuff. Then moved to China, lived there for 2 years, learned fluent Chinese, and also worked with a startup there. So joined super early. We raised a bit of capital and then went through SOSV, which is a bigger US accelerator. But they have a bunch of different offices. And then actually ended up joining SOSV. So I worked with the investment team for a bit. We looked at India, a bit of Korea, music, tech, Southeast Asia predominantly, just because, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam is obviously very, very booming markets. And then, went back to school in Singapore. I did a postgraduate degree there as well at NUS and in China. And then joined Blockchain Founders Fund as sort of the third guy there, together with Ali Mansour. And since 2 years, we've been building this VC. I've invested in about 55 plus companies now across in the last 2.5 years. Had a crypto unicorn in a gaming space called Splinterlands, a bunch of other really good successes in those 2 years. And in February this year, we actually decided, okay, let's raise a proper fund. And so now currently we're raising a 75 million fund. We've got 45 million committed right now, and going to have the first capital call in about 2 weeks, and then starting deploying the money into interesting blockchain and emerging tech startups, basically from November on, mid of November. And yeah, going to do 200 investments over the next 3.5 years, and hopefully find some other interesting companies. Pretty sure find some interesting companies. And then the next question you asked is like something nobody knows. It's actually interesting, which kind of connects me back to where I actually started off and came from, which is Oberammergau, right? So every 10 years, we have what we call a passion play, right? So it's something where everybody, that's almost the whole village comes together every 10 years and plays a theater act, right? It takes 5 hours to be played 100 times, and you're not allowed to cut your hair for almost 2 years because it needs to be realistic, right? So you have to picture me with probably hair like this and in a white angel costume, walking across the stages and, talking to the people what God has been told in the past. So, that's something very specific from our hometown. It's happening every 10 years. It's actually happening 2020 as well. And also 2022, actually, because of COVID, it got shifted for 2 years. I'm not going to be participating this time, but I have done a couple of times in the past. And if you go on YouTube, you're probably going to find me.
That's awesome. Well, now I have to ask another question about this. So who coordinates this, and how big is the city, and how many people are participating in this no cut your hair for 2 years?
Yeah, it's quite big, honestly. So we've done this since 400 years.
Wow.
Right? So every 10 years, except I think World War I or World War II or something, that was a little bit of gap. This has been happening every 10 years, right? And there's one person in the city called Christian. He's like kind of organizing it, putting it all together, recruiting the people. And it's a huge thing, right? I mean, we are 4,000 people, 4,500 people in this village. And I think probably like 3,500 people actually act, right? So every time we act, there's 5,000 people watching it. We acted 100 times. So it's 500,000 people just coming to this tiny village over the course of, I think, like 3 months or so. Like it's happening 5 or 6 days a week. And it takes like 6 hours, right? A 2-hour break in between. So it's a whole day thing. And people come from all over the world. Like it's gotten quite a bit of attention. So we have a lot of Asian tourists, a lot of from the US. So basically from everywhere. And it's like, honestly, it's the biggest thing every 10 years for this little village. You can imagine, right? Nothing else is happening there much, except a bunch of tourists. But it's a nice and cute little town.
Oh, that's incredible. And I think just being part of that atmosphere and having to coordinate and put all this together sounds pretty cool. Probably not the best profession to go into if you're a hairdresser or working in a salon. You might lose out some dollars for a couple of years, but I guess there's always ways to trim that hair and keep yourself looking polished. But It's still pretty cool. I think that's a lot of people that come together. So real communal based. I grew up in a small town of 6,000 people. So when you say a village, I'm thinking like 150 people, but 4,000 people in a village is sounds like a pretty big small town. But either way, maybe I'll say I came from a village too, and then I can share my story of a small town growing up. But that's I love how people correlate the two differences, right?
Yeah, I mean, when I lived in China, I lived in Shanghai with 25 million people. That is, they don't even know what 4,000 people looks like. Like that's
agreed.
A city or a village in the
that's
first place.
That's 1 person. That's 2 carts on the subway track. So yeah,
exactly. That's my neighborhood building.
That's pretty village. Yeah, exactly. Now I can see that. I can vision that. So I'm from a village too. Then, so I'm going with it. But that's pretty amazing. That's pretty cool. So we'll take a step back though, and kind of dive a little bit more into what I think is pretty prevalent to any VC or anybody that's investing in early stage companies, and that's that you worked in a startup and you've been through the ringer of what it takes to be in a startup. Are there any kind of real lessons that kind of stood out for you when you were working in a startup? What it felt like, what it was like for a founding team to kind of build up their product, raise funds? Any couple points, maybe 3 or 4 points that really stood out about what it takes to be a startup?
Yeah, I mean, so I work with 2 startups actually. So one in Cambodia and one in China. And first of all, it's a very different environment to be in. The startup was more in the tech space, and the other one I worked with was in the fintech space. So I think a couple of interesting points to mention here is obviously, first of all, when you start really, really early on, it's you're going to end up doing everything, right? And need to be completely okay with it. That's also the people you want to recruit for, right? If you hire a guy in a BD role in the beginning and that's sort of what he's focused on, I think it's going to be challenging, right? Because he's going to end up doing recruiting, he's going to end up doing reporting, he's going to end up doing finance, he's going to end up doing anything, right? Because there are 3 people in that startup, and you need to be flexible and agile enough to take on literally every task which comes across your board, right? Or your desk, essentially. So from a hiring perspective, that's interesting. The second thing is, what we have done a couple of mistakes before is hiring people with the wrong vision, right? There's a couple of people who are not really 100% aligned with what the end goal is, right? And then you see that pretty fast in terms of compensation, right? They care more about the cash benefit rather than a stock option, all these kind of things, which then should already be eye-opening to some extent. So recruiting the first people in terms of skill set, but also in terms of vision is one of the biggest things which I've learned. And a second thing is probably in these emerging markets quite interesting, is from a geopolitical perspective, right? So doing business is of course not easy in the first place, but doing it in a country like Cambodia, for example, where everything is, even from an infrastructure or government perspective, much more emerging than it is somewhere else, brings additional challenges. And these are challenges you probably would never imagine, right? If you do business in the US probably, or even in Germany, where I come from, it's still difficult to have a startup because operational challenge and execution perspectives, but things like corruption, right? And things like other issues you probably know that they're existing, but are not very present to you become a very different scale in these markets, and they have a different additional hindrance to growth, right? An additional challenge to growth. And that was actually the first time I really realized that, right? And I had no idea before what perspective and scale this could take on. So these are a couple of interesting things, which I think is especially relevant in these markets. And I mean, China is obviously getting better, but Cambodia is still early stage, and there's still a bit of a wild west in the sense of what you can do and can't do. And you see that quite extensive in terms of regulations, in terms of laws which have been made up, and also, in terms of how the whole system works, right? It's not as straightforward as a process. It's more like, who do you know, who you don't know, and how do you get to those people? And then you can do a lot of other things as well.
Those are three great points, and two of them I'm going to hit on because I think that they're really relevant to kind of the conversation on what learnings that you've brought into the environment, which I think are huge. The many hats, you're right, small team, you're going to wear a lot of different hats to build your company, and you're kind of shift and grow as your business grows. So you're going to bring new people in. You're going to slowly try to focus as you grow your business and commercialize it up. So those things will happen. One of the things when you talked about the vision and having people that were part of the same vision to build the business and same part of the same strategy, maybe share a little bit more about how you were able to determine when people aren't on the same page, when people aren't really understanding where you're trying to go, and what measures you can take to either align people on that vision or move them out of the business because they're only going to be bringing the business down. What are the red flags that you see around that? I think this is highly important for startups because I would imagine that a lot of them are just building, and sometimes they're not paying attention to all the different resources on the team and not really maybe getting the feedback of negativity or going in a different direction, or people's personalities getting in the way. What kind of things stand out, or red flags do you notice that startups could utilize to help them better see this and then pivot and change as they need?
Yeah, I think you have to sort of break this down in maybe like 2 or 3 areas, right? Obviously, the first thing is probably like from a hiring perspective, and then from an execution perspective, and then probably like moving forward, right? These are like the 3 areas in a cluster. So let's pick the first one from a hiring perspective. I think when you're talking, especially early stage, right? When you're hiring your second or third, fourth, fifth, sixth guy, or was a girl, you want to make sure that when you talk to them, they know about the space, right? They kind of give you ideas and not just like ask. I mean, the thing is, for me, it's important that because if I hire the fourth, fifth guy, right, they're not going to be executing what I tell them, right, or what anyone else is going to tell them. I need someone who kind of builds this company with me and brings in own ideas and has a similar, maybe even a slightly different vision, right? But then you kind of align and pivot together, and with all the conversations you're going to have, and with customer feedback and investor feedback, you kind of get your way around, right? So when you interview someone who is taking an important position early in a company, you essentially want to be challenged by that person, right? And you want to ask him where this company is essentially going and how he sees the market evolving, and like he brings all these interesting components to a conversation, and not just like, if you tell me this, I'm going to do that, right? I mean, that's like the wrong mindset of someone who will take an important decision in an early stage company. And then the second is also, even from a compensation perspective, right? If someone really believes in what you're doing and thinks this is going to be the next unicorn, they're probably going to be more interested in actually getting part of the equity or getting part of the stock options or things like this, because that's what, really ties their performance to the company's performance, right? If someone is only interested in getting a cash component or, making a short-term thing, I think it already shows that the vision is probably a little bit different, right? Because if you are going to be working with the next Facebook and the next Facebook is going to win, then you don't care about $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 cash, right? You want to have the shares, obviously, right? And that was what's going to bring the whole value in, but that's also what aligns the incentives again. Now, if you're already in sort of working with founders and building with them, I think it's super important that people are coachable, right? Especially early, where like the company probably going to look 100% different throughout the first years, right? In terms of vision, in terms of how we build things, in terms of even business models change sometimes completely, right? After you talk to first customers and get your insights and and even talk to investors and get feedback. So if someone is very, very much aligned in what they want to do, and there's no way of, having a flexibility in terms of conversations, or if someone is not really coachable and thinks they're always right, it might be good for like an investment banking position, right? Where there is not really wrong or right in a sense. But since this is going to change so tremendously and has so tremendously impact on what you're going to do, it is also, challenging to work with these people. And then a second part, what I think is pretty interesting, is another perspective of work ethics, right? It's not a 9-to-5 job. And there will be ad hoc stuff, and raising a startup is kind of like raising a child in a way, right? It needs constant attention, and you need to constantly work together and figure out, constantly going to have challenges which seem impossible to overcome, but then you're probably going to find a way to overcome. So having someone with that sort of mindset, right, that this is something he's going to devote his time to, and if you want to make it big, is extremely important, right? If someone comes in like, okay, I'm going to work hard 9-to-5, that's probably also going to be challenging early on, right? I mean, later, yes, fair enough, there are going to be different positions, but this is all like where I see red flags. But again, right, it also depends on the startup founder itself, right? If you don't want to be the next unicorn, if you just want to build an interesting, sustainable business, then it's up for you to decide where your vision is, and then surround yourself with people who are potentially better, or even probably better than you, because you should never be the smartest person in the room, right? Not even the smartest person in your startup. And then, align them with the vision you want to see this going, right? If you want to see this next unicorn, and you have people with a similar vision. If you want to see this the next small, medium-sized business and just, make a decent salary out of it and never sell it, then you need to have similar people with a similar vision, right? And then that's sort of what I mean with choosing first. But if you chose, sometimes this could even be wrong, and then figuring out, okay, what to do with this person is, sometimes it's hard to let the person go, but you should also not be intimidated by being challenged as a founder, right? So someone that challenges you as a founder also need to be coachable and need to be, sometimes take it in your pocket, right? If someone else has a better idea, then so be it, right? Not just because you're the founder or the CEO that everything you're going to say is going to be perfect, right? That's also important to know. And that's the kind of people I would like to have around me when I do something, right?
Well, there's a lot there, so I'll kind of unpack some of them. But what I think is kind of the key to your hiring process, and to make sure that they're aligning to your vision, is that you're hiring leaders. You're hiring people that maybe they're not a 100% full leader today, but they're aspiring to become a leader. So they're going to push back against the founders. They're going to push back and challenge all of the people in the business to ensure that it's going in the right direction. It's growing, it's building, it's scaling, whatever, as you mentioned, whichever version you take of your business, if you want to be a unicorn, or you want to just be a happy family office. So I guess there's different stages, but you're really trying to find some strong leadership. And I think to unpack the other piece of it was that not only are you finding leaders, but you're finding people that are self-directed, that they can take the ball and run with it. So it's not you having to dictate what everybody needs to do, because like you said, at person 4 or 5, it's kind of getting out of the realm of you managing everybody, micromanaging. So you got to have leaders that are really tackling the market, pushing the business forward, and you're kind of aligning to that vision now, not aligning to someone telling you what to do.
Yeah.
And then tying in the coachable aspect of it, which is it kind of seems like the founder has to be more malleable as well, and kind of drop the pride and look at their team as instruments that are going to help them scale and grow. And they need to be able to take that input, feedback, coaching, anything that's going to help them improve at the same time. So not only are they being the leader and moving the business forward, but they're also being malleable to adjust to the personalities and everybody on the team, so that that strategy or the vision continues to keep aligning as they move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. And that's the point I wanted to bring across. Yeah, and especially the last point is really, really important, right? Because we have tried to work with a couple of founders before, or even seeing them on the call and things like this, when everything the founder says is the right thing, right? Just because this person has been in the industry for 10 years and figured out this problem and built the business early on. And that might all be true, and it's highly respected, right? I mean, if you've done this, you have my full respect. It's a very, very difficult journey. but it's still, sometimes you're so concentrated and so tunneled in what you're doing that any outside perspective is also super helpful, right? Because it can bring out this different light, this different perspective, what you need as a founder, because it's so obvious for you, everything you do, right? Because that's where you live in, that's where you work in. But every other who comes in as a different perspective is similar to like how a customer would look at it, right? If you think about it, right? They don't have all this previous knowledge. They just want to have something easy, simple, which works. And then sometimes you get stuck in like, it looks obviously very, very simple to you, but sometimes it is not, right? And then outside perspective, and you should have the courage to accept if something is actually better or more interesting or a good advice, right? No matter how good or bad or rich or whatever you are.
No, that's a great point. And I think a lot of founders need to kind of take that step back at some point and realize that they're building a business, they're building a lot of personalities, and there's a lot of people that are hungry, interested, and want to grow and support the founder, no matter if they're the smartest person in the business or not the smartest, but they're at least driven to make something successful. People want to get part of a vision. They want to be part of something that has to go somewhere. It's tough to find people that just like to hang out and work and not go anywhere. So I guess that's a real big component to what you're saying, is that you really do have to have that strong vision so that everybody can align and you all have those same successes and you're doing them as a team.
Yeah. That's the same thing for advisors, mentors. Anything you bring on, they should all be aligned to that vision. So everybody is sort of pulling on the same string essentially to get to that goal where you want to end up going and what you think is best for the business, but then obviously getting advice and getting input along the way.
I love it. And you mentioned this before, but getting coaching and getting advisors and help, I think that makes a big difference in any business project or anything that you're going to do. It certainly helps help you work your way through a lot of those issues. And I think the one that I'm excited to talk about is more excited, I guess, is the geopolitical side that you mentioned. And, we talked to a lot of investors around the world. And what I love about what you brought up is that there is this underlying elephant in the room, which is every country operates differently. And you probably don't learn a lot of these things until you're in the thick of it. And then kind of like you said, you had to learn that there's different things that can go on in government. And some of it might be greasing the wheels of justice or whatever that might be. And startups probably learn the hard way when they get in, how they have to operate, how they have to grab attention of officials or businesses. And everybody has a different way of how they get compensated and how they operate and work inside of that business space. So maybe you can open up this a little bit more around the types of things that you've seen. And I wouldn't say it's just specific to Asia. I'm sure that there's a lot of countries 100%. In the world that startups have to work through these types of measures. But what I'm interested in about it is that it's not to call it out and say, hey, this country, you got to pay off this guy in order to get this to work. It's more of understanding what types of things can startups face, and then what's their way to work around them. And I have a feeling that a lot of this goes back to the coaching and the advisors that come in, that they're the ones that have been living through this like the 30 years, as you mentioned, and they're going to bring enough experience to help you tackle through some of these big problems.
Yeah, no. I think it's a very good start, what you mentioned. So first of all, what can go wrong, right? Or what could end up being in a challenge. And I'm talking more from the countries I have experience in as of now, but I'm pretty sure, as you said, it's probably everywhere could run some challenges like this. But as when you're in a relatively stable market, I would say like Singapore, you worry more about like customer acquisition, when to get funding, like the standard problem a startup essentially faces. And you don't really worry about like, will I ever get a bank account, right? Or will I ever get a license, right? Or will I ever, be invited to some certain events where I need to be part of, right? And the thing is, especially in emerging markets, if you are able to pull off an interesting business, the market is very, very small and it's something very, very special, right? So if you raise a big amount of funding, the whole country will know, right? And you will just be on people's radar, right? If you like it or not, right? Because there is simply not as many of these breakouts as you might have in other countries, right? So for example, we worked at a company and we raised actually I think it was the biggest seed round in the whole country ever, right? So if you do this, obviously people know you, right? And
everybody wants to know you if they don't know you yet.
Everybody wants to know you. Exactly, right? So it's obviously on the one side, it's a very good thing because hiring talent and getting media attention is very simple, and it also helps you, of course, pushing the name out cross-border, because in some countries, even though they're emerging, the actual market you can capture is probably smaller or is developing currently, right? So it's always important, especially markets like Laos, Cambodia, or even smaller markets in Africa or South America. Like the strategy will always be capturing what you can in your market, especially the bigger cities, and then the outskirts or the provinces you will probably not reach, right? Because the infrastructure is very, very different. So you have to go cross borders to the next biggest cities. And in Asia, for example, it's interesting because it's very homogeneous, right? So even in Cambodia and Phnom Penh, which is still a bit of an early stage country in general, people use people go to Starbucks and spend $5 on a coffee, right? Although the GDP per capita is obviously a very different story than somewhere else in the world. They all have TikTok, right? They even invest in cryptocurrency, right? So it's very simple and very similar. But then you move out of the Phnom Penh place, so like out of the capital, then the whole landscape looks very, very different, right? So that's why you either focus on one market and like build something which everybody can use, which is then more of an infrastructure perspective, or you build more of something sophisticated and layer it on top, and then obviously move out and capture similar markets. And that's the next problem, right? So once you get all this attention, and relationships are typically in the countries I've been working on very, very important, right? So if you have a challenge with one relationship, even though that might be before you've ever done anything in the business world, now you have the attention. So now this person has probably a bit of power, right? So that then also determines of who you speak to, of who you get invited to, and that is a big thing, right? So and building these long-term important relationships is becoming a very different level, right? And it's not just of like connecting with someone on LinkedIn and having a chat with them. That's like, it goes way, way deeper, right? It goes like supporting what they're doing, like going to all their galas, like, getting engaged with them, right? It's building a literally long-term relationship. So this whole networking becomes a very, very different meaning in that space, right? So I've always been trying to do a lot of networking and things, but when I reached this country, I knew, okay, that's a whole different level. And if you're not used to this as a founder, that's going to tremendously put a barrier in front of everything you're going to do, right? Because you have to approach it as the country does it, right? And not as you as a founder would do it. And then it comes basically to your point, is how do you understand that and how do you reach this, right? And it's typically not by yourself reading a book about it, right? That's probably not going to help you a lot. So what you need is local people, or even people who have been in the market for a very, very long time, who understand how business is being done there, right? And these people you want to get involved, these people you want to talk to, because even if you potentially have closed the door, they might be able to open it, but not yourself, right? If you fuck up this relationship, sorry my language, like you're out, right? This is done. So you need someone else opening the door for you again, right? There's no way of knocking against the door and saying, I'm sorry, that was a bit rough, or I don't know, you had this dispute down the road. This door is closed from your own personal perspective. So I think the biggest takeaway is, you have to expect the challenge literally everywhere. Even from things you would expect that everything runs smoothly, right? Opening a bank account in the US is probably a straightforward process, right? No one is going to come and say, oh, you're not going to open a bank account, right? It's probably not going to happen, right? But like these things can happen. And it's a very important decision where you go into market, right? Because now we see a lot of companies coming over and, I want to build a market, a startup in Indonesia because the market is big, right? Fair enough, that's true. That's also a lot of people tried in China and completely failed, right? Because the whole market is so different. So you as not a local with no local connections, with no partnerships in the market, with no legal standing, with always having them challenging setting up entities, setting up bank accounts, getting licenses just because you're not, Cambodian or Indonesian, and there are some certain restrictions of how you can operate. It will be very challenging for doing business there. Right. So that's why you want to surround yourself with local people who understand the system, who have good connections, and then advisory boards but also hires, right? Ground hires. You cannot build a business in Cambodia with only foreigners. It's also not going to happen. There's a bunch of these challenges, which again come around hiring, come around from operations perspective, but also then of like adjusting to it as fast as possible, and not adjusting by reading a book, but actually getting real hands-on advice of how this would potentially going to play out if you do X, Y, Z, right? Yeah, it gives the whole founding experience a whole nother level. Adds a bit of salt, adds a bit of pepper, makes it a bit more spicy, but also makes it more interesting, right? I mean, as long as you can sustain and you build a long-term relationship that solves the problem, you can also succeed in these markets. It's just going to take a little bit more time probably, and it's going to be a little bit more challenging.
I love that because when I started a company in the Philippines 15 years ago, there was a lot of interesting challenges, but it wouldn't have started if I didn't have Filipino partners. I wouldn't have occurred if I didn't understand the culture. And you kind of take it for granted because you're just moving quickly. You're not really paying attention to all the little elements that you just talked about, but how vitally important they are. And what it really comes down to is the relationships that you build and how strong are those relationships? Because when things get tough, are they stepping in to help you? Are they helping direct you around those tough spots because they're locals? They understand how the government works. They understand how businesses are working on the ground, so they can actually steer you through. And a lot of them came from just setting up bank accounts or understanding how you could actually register a company as a foreigner in a foreign country. And a lot of those stipulations came up, and they don't want to work with you, or the banks are saying, well, we're not sure we can do this because you're a foreigner. So it is quite fascinating, the things that you learn. And I think to your point, the biggest thing that comes out of all of this, that when you are starting a company in another country, is that you figure out how to be a pretty damn good networker and go deep as you can on the relationships, because those are the ones that are going to help you survive.
And then if you do that, right, I mean, all these markets, they truly offer a tremendous potential of doing business there, right? So it's just a way of like approaching it correctly. And as you said, building these long-lasting and deep ties to the cultural, the business, and the political side, and then have the right people to support you when some things get challenging.
And now that you've spent the last few years traveling around and building up in Asia and other countries as well, but specifically in Asia, now you've launched into your own fund over the last 2 years, taking all these great learnings that you have and all these deep relationships that you've created. How much easier was it for you to kind of kick off and build up this venture firm because of all the types of relationships that you made that people wanted to support you? So you ended up becoming a lot easier than just dropping in and saying, hey, I'm creating a venture firm. Everybody line up. Let's get going. Did it work a lot easier for you in that fashion because you understood the culture, you understood how to integrate easier, so it was a little more acceptable for you to kind of dive in here and start working with all these different broad companies and investors?
I mean, it definitely helped a lot, right? I mean, all these experiences tied together, especially if because like I think it's important to have that background of being an operator, but also being an investor, right? So having to work before in like an investment firm, but then also being on the ground and like see what the struggles actually are and like what the founders go through. First of all, gives you a lot of credibility as an investor, or let's say a little bit more credibility. And then, but also for yourself, when you're doing the due diligence and you see certain problems arising, you kind of get an idea of how easy or how difficult to solve them essentially. So with Blockchain Founders Fund, I mean, Ali and Mansoor, they set it up very, very initially, and they did a fantastic job, right? So of course I came in super early, and then we built this together to an extent, but they are also in a similar space, right? They lived in various different countries, similar to me. We met actually in China, so that's how the whole relationship started. And they've been an operator and an investor before as well, right? So that it's kind of like we have a similar background in a sense, which kind of, and everybody is very sort of oriented of reaching that vision, right? Of supporting these emerging tech companies across also emerging markets, and like just really look for the deeper problem and not just like funding random businesses, right? We always want to look, okay, what actually impact do you have towards a society or towards whatever industry you're in? So I love their vision in the very beginning, right? So that's why I joined so early, and that's why I'm staying with them today, and it's a fantastic journey. But it definitely helped. I mean, we applied for the license in Singapore. It was still a long process. It took us 5 months or something to get the license. I got a tremendous support from MAS in Singapore, from the government, because we're doing something which is also not super straightforward, right? Because still going to blockchain space, we're still going to emerging tech space, whereas something maybe a little bit more not risky, but like it's still a bit more emerging in a sense, right? So I think the way that the team is split up, I think makes us just work together super well, right? So we have someone who is like very much on the growth side of things, right? So how do you scale stuff? Then we have someone who's a super good networker and someone who's really good fundraising. And then we work quite hands-on with the companies and help them, right? But we also had our learnings from the past. And I think what is really, really important to us and sort of helps us right now a bit is since all of us was working in a startup before, and I was literally every time I was working with a startup, advised a startup, or even applied for a startup at some point in time, the only question I have is like, what problem are you solving? Right. So why are you allowed to be in this market? Right. That's sort of the idea. And that was our fund thesis, right? So we want to solve problems with actual use cases who've proven product to market fit, right? Everything else is then supportive, right? Obviously you want to have interesting founders and stuff like this. But that is helping me tremendously to make interesting decisions and going through these deep processes and being on call with founders and also setting up the own fund, right? Because that's kind of like your own venture as well, in the sense of going through these processes, building the fund, getting documents out, and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's our background. Second, it's the team, and third is like that we all sort of believe in the same vision and move this forward basically 24/7. Right. And that really helped. And the background definitely helped.
I love it. And you mentioned that being part of a startup really makes a big difference, and it allows you to really engage with the startups better because you can relate easier, knowing both of you have gone through the thick and thin of things. And I like the line that you said, which was, what problem are you solving and why are you allowed to be in this space? And I like that because it's very direct. And it proves a point that you can't succeed without having a problem to solve. And then you got to prove why you belong in this space, because I think from any investor standpoint, if you can't answer that question, then you're not really investable. So prove to me why, or prove to us or yourself why you actually should be selling in here, because you're so early. I'm not seeing the wins. Show me and prove to me why this works. So I love that line. That's bang on. And again, of course, the team, the vision, all of those things really structure to help you support the vision of where you guys are going in this fund. Can you just quickly chat to a couple of things around the types of companies that you look to invest in, and where do you see as being maybe the next emerging markets or the next big innovation that you think is going to come over the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the new fund, we kind of continuing something which we have already been doing, which we've proven to be working. So we invest in early stage companies, right? It's pre-seed to pre-series A. So typically we go in, the most successful investments we've done probably between a 3 and 10 million valuation. We focus on anything sub 20 million valuation. They're super early. Anything asset light. So we don't do anything hardware related. We are location and industry agnostic, except like, this hardcore biotech or medtech solution where you need a lot of domain expertise. We typically stay a bit away from that. And with the new fund, we are going to raise, we're in the process of finishing the raise of $75 million, right? So we're going to deploy this in about 200 companies over the next 3.5 years. So it's early, it's small checks, right? It's 200K on a first, or up to 200K on a first check size. And then we want to work with the companies quite hands-on. Like I mentioned, you have typically weekly calls with them and really help them solve their problems. And then once we get to know the company and we kind of know how the company is standing, then we can do larger checks from 500K to 5 million, right? To really help them scale at further rounds down the road. And we're not any. I mean, although we focus a bit on actually quite a bit on blockchain, it's not that we are a token fund, right? So we always want to go on equity, and that's why again it's so important for us. So it's the problem and the product market fit, right? Because we are long-term investors. We have an 8-year essentially fund life, and that's how we see it, right? We want to have someone who is similar aligned, who is there for the long term, wants to build sustainable businesses, and wants to have our capital and also support to help them scale, right? And that's been working quite well. If you look at Splinterlands, one of the biggest successes when we backed them, probably like a 4 million valuation, is currently now raising in the billions. One of the biggest blockchain games in the space right now, growing very, very fast. We had probably more than 100 calls with them over the last 2 years, right? And like literally every week, Ali, tremendous kudos to him in this space, is working very hands-on with them to help them reach this stage, and like, really on every different angle, same as Mansoor and me as well. And kind of that's the same approach we have with all of our companies, right? And especially from a market perspective, when you ask me where I see a lot of potential moving forward, is of course, I mean, Southeast Asia, I think is big. And you mentioned Philippines, where you also been active, where a lot of our gamer communities from Splinterlands is also coming from, where you see probably going to see a lot of growth moving forward. I mean, GDP per capita is increasing. You have very high mobile phone penetration. You have very low data costs, which, paired with a young and hungry generation, is gonna do the change. And also governments are quite favorable, right? If you especially look at the blockchain and crypto space, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, even Malaysia, even Cambodia, right? They launched Bakong, which is a blockchain-based payment switch, right? And that's like, I was impressed that this was a priority of the government, right? But it obviously shows how forward-thinking they already are. And that's driven by, just young people who are getting so much exposure to different markets and kind of leapfrogging, as this buzzword says, right? From, mobile first, literally, right? And no one is using a credit card. They all pay with their phone. They never had a credit card in the first place, like it's just so different of what priorities they have and how further they're moving into the space. And of course, from a blockchain perspective, it's a very similar thing. With play to earn and gaming, people in the Philippines are able to make 2 to 3 times their monthly income by just playing a video game, right? Which is game changing in this market. And especially also it solves core problems such as international remittance. Sending money from A to B is typically very expensive, and you need to have a bank account, right? The unbanked percentage in Philippines is probably around 70%, which makes it even more difficult to open bank accounts for a business, grow your business, because you cannot really escape your working capital needs if you cannot get a loan. And of course, from a personal perspective, if you want to send money from A to B, it's about 50 cents in Indonesia, which is the same price as a bowl of rice, right? Which is kind of intense if you think about it. If you compare this to Western or Europe or US, I'll be like, sending 3-4 euros, literally just sending from bank to bank, right? That's quite high. And then you probably think about twice if you actually want to do that. And then that's why you see PayFast and all these companies, Pin2, have so much traction in this market, because they really solve a problem which prevents people from doing something, right? And that's why all these emerging technologies are growing so fast. And that's why I see in these markets, but also parts of Africa and parts of Latin America is so interesting from an investor perspective.
I love it. And that sounds pretty exciting. Like you guys are right in the thick of things, making some great investments. And of course, just living and learning how these startups are interacting with everybody. And, China's been pretty advanced in the last few years on their ecosystem and their startups. And it's obviously branching off into all of the other countries surrounding it. And it seems like Southeast Asia is just moving really fast. And that's exciting.
Absolutely.
Very exciting. Very cool. Okay, well, we're going to jump in real quickly. We got one last question before we go into rapid fire questions. And that one last question was, in the journey and everything you've done in the startup space, is there one story that really stands out for you around a startup that maybe you thought was going to fail, COVID hit, whatever it might be, but just what it takes to really be a startup, and what it takes to be an entrepreneur to kind of live through the ebbs and flows, the roller coaster ride? Is there any story that really stood out that she or he really impressed you and just blew your mind on what it took to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. And actually one story which I found really, really impressive. There's a company called Click. It's a payment. It started off as a payment company, now became a legit fintech company with a bunch of different components of how they make money. But they launched in a very emerging market, and went basically through every challenge I mentioned before. And I was impressed by the founder's mindset, right? But not just one founder, like literally all of them, right? They didn't get paid for a month, but they believed that what they're doing is correct, right? And like even the people, like after 3-4 months of not being paid a cent, because they couldn't at this point in time, everybody was still pulling together, going to the office and working, because everybody believed in what they're actually doing adds a tremendous value to the ecosystem. And it was always very, very challenging, right? You can imagine, especially the burden of a founder, of a CEO who, has to sleep with all of this every single day is very, very difficult. But in the end, they pivot the business model and went more from a B2C to a B2B. They got traction, they got funding, and they pulled through it, right? But no one essentially quit. And that is exactly from a recruiting perspective so important, right? If you only have people who are not believing 100% in what you're doing is going to create tremendous value, they are not going to be there after not getting paid for 1 or 2 months, right? And that can happen faster as anybody thinks in a startup. And probably everybody reached that point closely, or even had it, when you need to raise a bridge round or all these things, or not take salary as a founder yourself. And that's what I mean. That's why I saw these points as just so important, because if you reach such a stage, which unfortunately can happen and happens to most of the startups out there, if you look from a pure statistical perspective, right? You need to have the right people who pull through this and still be motivated and still believe in the bigger vision. And that's exactly what they're doing. And I have never seen anything like this before, right? I mean, of course, getting a month not paid, or getting a pay cut or something like this, but getting not paid for half a year and literally coming back to office, like every single one is kudos to the founders of building a community and keeping the vision in the company that much, and building this friendship essentially, so people stick together even if something goes really, really wrong.
Oh, that's incredible. And you mentioned the pivot too, so it's pretty cool that when you get yourself into a real challenge and a real pickle and you can't pay and you can't do something, but you really believe in the vision, that eventually things are going to alter just enough to get you into the right spot. But sometimes you got to hit the bottom before you can start moving up. So that's pretty amazing story, and great to hear that they were able to work their way through it as a team and keep growing. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, they're crushing it.
I love it. Crushing is good. All right, we're going to jump into rapid fire questions. We're going to start off with business questions, and then we're going to get into the personal side. So Pick one or the other. Ready to roll?
Yeah, ready to roll.
All right. Founder or co-founder?
Founder.
Unicorn or 4-year 10x exit?
Unicorn.
Tech or CPG?
CPG.
Brand or tech?
Brand.
AI or blockchain?
Blockchain.
I was going to guess that one, but just want to double check. Checking your convictions. First time founder or second, third time founder?
Myself?
No, just in general, like if you're investing, which one?
Oh, I rationally would say the second time or third time founder, but I love investing in first time founders.
Okay. First money in or Series A?
First money in.
Angel or VC?
VC, but early.
Okay. Board seat or observer?
Observer.
Safe or convertible note?
Safe.
Lead or follow?
Follow.
Equity or interest payments?
Equity.
Favorite part of investing?
Working with the founders.
Number of companies invested per year?
25.
You're on the super high threshold. Amazing. Any preferred terms that you guys like?
To be honest, we are very founder friendly. We don't really have that much terms. Coachability is something important for us. And, we typically get some equity vested for our support.
Okay.
Or tokens vested, depends.
Verticals of focus?
I'm a big fan of edtech and fintech.
Okay. And then two things that really stand out for you when a startup approaches you that you like to see to get you into that investment mode?
If someone immediately starts with what problem they're solving and does not put the tech in the forefront, so not saying, "Oh, I'm a blockchain company," like, I don't care. I want to see what problem you're using. If you use blockchain, that's great for us because it fits our thesis, but blockchain alone won't cut it. And the second thing is unit economics, right? Even though if you understand the value of what that means for your business, even though the numbers might be not correct, but putting thought in this and actually building a story around numbers is very powerful for me.
I love it. Same. That's two great points. Okay, we're going to jump into the personal side. Book or movie?
Movie.
Superman or Batman?
Batman.
Pizza Pop or ice cream bar?
Pizza.
5 minutes with Bezos or Oprah?
Oh, that's a tough one, man. I want to speak to Oprah.
I like it. Arsenal or Manchester United?
Manchester United.
Damn it. Only found two Arsenal fans in all of this. And the second one actually just chose it because it was the first one I said. He wasn't a soccer fan. Bike or rollerblades?
Bike.
Big Mac or Chicken McNuggets?
Big Mac, 100%.
Trophy or money?
Trophy.
Beer or wine?
Beer.
Alarm clock or mobile phone?
Mobile phone.
Hotel or hostel?
Hostel.
The second hostel picker. I love it. King or rich?
I'm not a money person. I chose king.
Okay. Concert or amusement park?
Amusement park.
Fortune cookie or birthday cake?
Fortune cookie.
Has life been boring without Trump?
Sorry, say that again.
Has life been boring without Trump?
Yeah, definitely less headlines.
It's certainly not as loud as it used to be, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Favorite sports team?
FC Bayern Munich.
Which one?
The German football, like the Munich one. FC Bayern
Munich
München.
team. Yeah.
The Munich team.
Munich. Yeah. Fantastic. That's awesome. I follow them on Twitter and watch their games too.
You should. They're pretty solid.
Oh, they're a great team. Yeah, they always have been. They always seem to pull off great talent. So yeah, great team. Favorite movie and character you would play in the movie?
James Bond, Goldeneye, and I want to be James Bond.
Awesome. I like it. What movie was it? Which version?
James Bond Goldfinger, I think you could translate it.
Goldfinger. Okay, English, cool. Yeah, I like it. All right.
I watched every single James Bond movie, by the way.
It's actually, I'm looking at a series. I might do that. I like that. I'm going to go back and watch them all. It's been a long time. Good idea. Done. All right. Favorite book. Favorite book.
Favorite book. Oh, there's a bunch of them. It's a German book, though.
Okay.
If I translate, it's something like "Ask for the Why," which kind of covers like even if you do something, you want to always understand where you're coming from. And I like it because like it ties back to literally all I'm doing is like just asking what's beyond that, right? Even if you hear something nice, headlines or something, it's always mostly not as good as people make it look like. right? And getting that critical eye, I think, is pretty cool.
I like it. Okay. First brand that pops in your mind.
Apple.
Most famous person that pops in your mind.
Most famous person pops in my mind. Who pops in my mind? Honestly, I forgot. I wanted to say my dad at the very beginning, but that's a bit too cliche. Honestly, I thought immediately about Jeff Bezos just because I talked to him before, and I read an article before about him.
Okay. It's a good answer too. I think I might move that question around because a couple of people have picked Bezos because I say his name and I'm like, no, that's not the point, but it makes sense. It's going to come up. So I'm going to shift that one beforehand so that it makes you really think, because I am curious as to the great thing is that a lot of people do pick Apple as their first brand that comes to mind. So and maybe it's just environmental, but they do a fantastic job of getting in your face, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so the last question we have, what is your superpower?
My superpower is genuine listening.
All right. That's a good power to have. More people could use the power of listening. So brilliant. I love it. Well, Tobias, I want to say thank you very much for all of your time today. I learned lots, took lots of notes. I always have to show this because I want people to believe that I actually do right. And but it was fantastic. I loved it. There was a lot of great insights. You shared a lot of great things. Amazing what you guys are doing with your new fund, tearing it up in Southeast Asia, which is amazing. And the way we like to end our show is we like to give you the last word. So we want you to share anything that you like to the investor community or to startups. But again, I thank you very much for all your time today. Fantastic. Great to learn more about you and what you're up to. So thank you for joining us today.
Definitely. I mean, I had a very good time. I love the questions, especially the quick questions in the end. And that's great to be on the podcast today. So the last couple of words, I think for me it's just what I want to say is essentially do something you're passionate about, right? And that's both from a founder perspective and from an investor perspective. And join a fund you're interested in what they're doing, and not just do you want to join a VC. And also as a founder, do something, doing something with the mindset of making this to get money is probably not going to work. And really think about, why am I in this market, right? And what do I do better than any competitors? Or if there's no competitor, is this really a market, right? And that comes again, if you're really passionate about what you're doing, it's on one side, it's obviously very good. But on the other side, it can also be a bit delusional, right? So getting this secondhand advice and figuring out these questions I just mentioned. And the same thing is for a VC. Every VC should give every startup attention. Even if you might not invest in them, it's still good to give them feedback or a notice, because I think everybody deserves that.
I love it, man. You've got bullet points after bullet points. So fantastic. All great insights. Again, Tobias, thank you very much for all your time today. It's been fantastic time. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Jeffrey.
Okay, that was a fantastic chat with Tobias in Singapore. Those guys are doing some amazing investments, working with so many great companies. And, I think he shared some really cool key pieces to helping startups, and not just in Singapore and Southeast Asia, but just in general. When you're going into a business, he talked about wearing many hats. You're three people. You're going to do a lot of different things. Have a strong vision. So write that vision down. That's your pitch, whatever that might be. Have a vision. And then you know what? You're going to have to battle through some geopolitical issues while you're building a company in different countries. Figure out what those are, but look for coaches, advisors, people that have done it before. They're going to help you maneuver through this a lot quicker. And then I guess just the end part, which was, again, supporting the passion. Be passionate about what you're doing. Have the right mindset. Don't always make it about money. Make it about why you're building this company, why you're solving this problem, why people are going to want to come to you for that solution. One day they'll pay you. In my mind, it was always, I work because I love what I do. I'm going to learn, but figure out what drives you. And it can't always be about money. and make sure there's a market and you're solving a problem. But Tobias, fantastic conversation. Again, thank you very much for all of that insight and sharing. It was fantastic. So thank you very much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Stitcher. You can also check us out at supportersfund.com, or for startup events, visit opn.ninja. Thank you and have a fantastic week.